In this video tutorial, I will explain how AwareIM supports working offline when there is no internet connection. Consider the scenario when the user has to go to the area where there is no internet connection. He takes his tablet or laptop with him and uses this tablet to add or edit some data with no internet available. Then, when he returns to the office, he wants the data that he has added or modified to be automatically merged with the data in his server database. I will explain what you have to do to support this scenario in your AwareIM application. The scenario has three separate stages: preparation for working offline, and returning to the office. Let's look at each stage in detail. Before the user goes offline, he has to open the screens he will be using while offline and populate them with the data from the server, if he is going to be using this data while working offline. At the moment, AwareIM supports offline mode for grids and calendars only, so the screen most likely needs to contain grids and calendars, and maybe some static HTML that the user will need. Most probably you will need a separate visual perspective for this. An important thing to note here is that pagination of grids and calendars is not available in the offline mode, because pagination requires the system to fetch the data for each page from the server. However, there is an option to load all available data at once, both for grids and calendars. The option is called Fetch Records of all pages at once. I will show it to you now. Here it is for the calendar. And here it is for the grid. If the user is likely to page through the data while working offline, calendars and grids should have this option enabled. This ensures that when the user goes offline, he has all the data he needs, irrespective of how many pages there are. Of course, this only needs to be done if the existing data is likely to be modified. If the user will only be adding records when offline, you don't need to worry about this. Another important thing here is that while working offline, the user will need to use special forms when adding records to the grid or calendar. He cannot use the forms he creates in AwareIM. To ensure this, a special pop-up editing mode must be enabled for the grids and calendars that the user will be working with. You can, however, control which attributes will be shown on these forms. I will show it to you now. This is the pop-up editor option for the grid, and you control which attributes will be available on the pop-up editor form, selecting the attributes to be displayed on the grid. And this is the calendar. You control which attributes will appear on this pop-up form using this dialog here. Once all data has been populated, the user has to press the special switch to tell the system that he is going offline. When this happens, AwareIM will no longer attempt to store the data on the server, but will use the local storage of the tablet or laptop instead. Therefore, you need to provide the switch to the user in his offline visual perspective. There are two ways to add the switch to a visual perspective. You can add it to the status bar, or you can add it to your application toolbar. So to recap, for the preparation stage, the developer has to do the following. Prepare a special screen, probably a visual perspective, that will have grids and calendars that the user will need. Make sure that the Fetch All Data at Once option is ticked for those grids and calendars whose data is likely to be changed. Make sure that the pop-up editing mode is enabled for these grids and calendars. Provide an offline mode switch in either the status bar or a toolbar. Before going offline, the user has to open the screen he will need while offline. Populate the screen with the data from the server if he intends to modify this data. Press the offline switch once he is ready to go offline. Nothing special needs to be done either by the developer or by the user for the time when the user is actually working offline. The user will be able to add records to his grids or appointments to his calendar using the pop-up editors. He will also be able to delete records or edit existing records. So after the user returns to the office, he needs his system to automatically merge the changes he has done while offline with the server database. All he has to do in this case is press the offline mode switch again, and AwareIM will automatically synchronize his changes with the server database. At the end of the process, AwareIM will display a log in case there were errors during synchronization. Again, the developer doesn't need to do anything for this stage. Now let's look at an example. I will demonstrate this using the standard CRM sample application. We will assume that our staff members can visit our customers and work there offline. While offline, they can change some details of the customer, add new records about communication with the customer, or change existing communication history, and also add future appointments with the customer to the calendar, or edit the existing ones. I will show you the final result first, and then we'll explain how it has been achieved. So here we have the CRM sample application. We have added the visit menu command. Before I go to visit a customer, I do the following while the internet connection with the office still exists. I click on the visit command, and a special screen is displayed. The screen has a list of existing customers and my calendar. Let's say that today I will visit Jane Ellison and Frank Moore. So I find these customers in the list. And open communication history for each of these customers, because I may need to add new history records or modify existing records. Now I just need to turn off the online mode and turn on the offline mode. Note the switch here. So I just turn the online mode off. Now I'm ready to go to the customer. Let's pretend now that we are at the customer side and we want to change his phone number. We click on the customer record and make our changes. What you saw there was actually a pop-up editor. Once I finish talking to the customer, I need to make record of this discussion. So I go to the communication history and click on Add. And then I record the discussion that we had. We can see now that our record has been added to the list. Suppose we also made an appointment for a follow-up meeting. So I go to the calendar and add a new appointment. You can see this new record on the calendar. Now I return to the office where my internet connection is back. All I have to do is switch the online mode back on. At this point, Where I Am synchronizes the data. Just to prove it, I will refresh my screen and go to the customer, and I will see my changes there. You can see that the phone number has been updated. Let's see now how this has been implemented. As you may have guessed, there is a special visual perspective called offline mode. And the menu command in the main perspective. When the user clicks on Visit, the offline mode perspective is shown. There are two queries shown by this perspective. One shows the customers and another the calendar. So we go to the customer query. We can see that the pop-up editing mode is enabled for this query. We assume here that the user will not need records of all customers while working offline, and rely on the fact that he will be filtering out all customers other than those he visits. That's why we didn't turn on Fetch All Data option for this query. But we did turn it on for the calendar query. And we have also specified the attributes that will be displayed on the pop-up form. We have also defined a query that shows contact notes of the selected customer. Again, we enabled Fetching All Data option and pop-up editing for this query. We have also defined an operation to run this query from the customer's query. And we have also enabled the offline mode switch for the toolbar of the offline mode visual perspective. That's pretty much all we had to do. Finally, I would like to point out one subtle point about initialization of new records. When we created a new contact node during the offline mode, we didn't link the customer with this record. but we have added a rule that does it automatically from the context, because the selected customer is in the context of the contact nodes query. Here is the rule. Whenever AIM synchronizes the data, this rule is executed and everything is properly initialized.